The poor old black woman fed a homeless Korean man, not knowing the decision would bring a convoy of Lamborghinis to her crumbling doorstep 20 years later. Steam rose slowly from the dented pot, mixing with the smell of pepper and onions and something warm that made the whole porch feel alive despite the peeling paint. Ngozi's front step was humble but clean. A worn wooden bench, a faded plastic bowl for coins, a metal spoon blackened from years of stirring. All around was the noise of the neighborhood. Okada engines revving, children shouting over who won at 10:10, a radio blasting Afrobeat from 3 houses down, and voices that knew each other's business without needing to ask. Ngozi had working hands. Hands with small burns from hot oil and knuckles that ached when the rain came. She adjusted her wrapper, tied tighter now than it used to be, and served a bowl to Amina, her neighbor, who had known her since before the road was paved. "God bless you, Mama," Amina said, leaving a few naira notes folded small. Ngozi barely smiled. It wasn't a big smile, it was one of those smiles that doesn't last long because life doesn't give you a break. "Make sure you eat it hot," she replied. When Amina left, Ngozi looked at the plastic bowl where she kept her money. It wasn't full, it never was, and today it seemed even lighter. People were buying less because the new kiosk down the street sold Indomie for cheaper, and Pastor Adewale had been collecting special offerings every Sunday, leaving less in people's pockets. Even so, Ngozi kept cooking. She always kept cooking. It was close to evening when the rain stopped and the air turned thick and gray. That's when she saw him. He wasn't walking like the others. He wasn't calling out greetings or bargaining with sellers. He was moving slowly, carefully, like someone who didn't want to be seen but couldn't help being noticed. He had dark hair plastered to his forehead, a thin frame that looked like stress had carved out the softness, and shoes worn down at the heel. His clothes hung loose, too big, or maybe just emptied out. He didn't have a bag. He didn't have an umbrella. He just had exhaustion. Ngozi watched him from the corner of her eye without making a scene. She didn't clutch her chest. She didn't make drama out of it, and she just looked at him the way you look at something that hurts because it's real. The man stood there, maybe 5 meters from the porch, not daring to get any closer. His eyes kept scanning the street behind him, nervous, like he was expecting something bad to catch up. Then he took a step forward and spoke softly, his accent making the words sound careful. "Please, small, hungry." Ngozi held the spoon in midair. She'd heard that word before from other people in other years, but there was something different about this one. He wasn't asking with a scheme. He was asking with shame. "You are far from home," she said without accusing him. The man's jaw tightened. He nodded once, like the gesture cost him effort. "Yes." Ngozi swallowed hard and looked at the pot. She looked at the coins in her bowl. She looked at the last piece of meat she'd been saving, the Sunday portion, even though it wasn't Sunday. Then she looked at the man again. He looked down, lips pressed together like he was trying not to beg twice. Ngozi took a deep breath and made a decision. It didn't feel heroic to her. It felt simple. "Come," she said, motioning with her hand. "Come sit. I don't keep hungry people standing." The man approached slowly, as if he was afraid it was a trap. Ngozi scooped rice into a cracked bowl and added the meat, all of it. The portion wasn't large like for a paying customer, but it was hot, and when you're hungry, warmth is a promise. He sat on the bottom step of her porch, not taking the bench, like he didn't deserve it. He ate fast at first, anxiously, and then slower, as if his body finally realized that yes, there was going to be food in his stomach. Ngozi watched him eat, and felt a knot in her chest she couldn't explain. Maybe it was the memory of her own struggles. Maybe the exhaustion of so many years. Or maybe that bitter thought that no one should eat like it was their last chance. "What is your name?" she asked, trying to keep her voice from shaking. The man looked up, surprised, like no one had asked him that in a long time. "Jiho," he said quietly. Ngozi nodded slowly, etching that name in her mind like someone guarding something they don't want to lose. "And where do you sleep, Jiho?" He looked down. "Anywhere I can." Ngozi tightened her fingers around the spoon. She looked around. People were passing by, buying things, not looking. A woman crossed the road with her umbrella, not noticing the stranger. A man in a clean shirt barely turned his head, frowning as if hunger was something shameful. Ngozi felt a stab of anger, And then she heard a voice behind her, sharp as a knife. "Mama Ngozi, feeding strangers again?" She turned around. It was Bankole, one of those types who always talked like he owned the block. The man who'd been coming around lately with his folder and his too bright smile, asking about processing fees and incomplete papers. "Don't come crying later when you can't pay your own bills," he added, looking at Jiho like he was dirt. Jiho sat perfectly still. His hand gripped the edge of the bowl. His eyes stayed down. Ngozi straightened up even though her back hurt. "I'm not crying," she said firmly, "and he is eating." Bankole let out a small laugh. "You'll fill your house with problems," he muttered, "and then when trouble comes, don't say nobody warned you." Ngozi held his gaze without lowering her head. "Trouble knows where to find me already," she said. "But hungry is still hungry." Bankole clicked his tongue and walked away, but his threat stayed there, floating in the air like smoke. Ngozi turned back to Jiho. He looked at her like he couldn't understand why anyone would stand up for him. His jaw tightened with something that looked like held-back emotion. Ngozi lowered her voice. "Finish," she told him, "and when you're done, you rest small. I won't sleep well if I just let you go like this." Jiho's eyes showed something more than hunger. They showed a tiny, flickering hope. Ngozi didn't know it, but in that instant, with one simple bowl and a firm sentence, she had just done something that the world doesn't easily forgive or forget. Because feeding a homeless Korean man was an act of kindness, but it was also, without meaning to, a promise. The street remained the same, Okadas passing, people buying without looking, the pot letting out that sizzle that sounded like a tired heart. But for Ngozi, that evening wasn't the same anymore. Because 20 years later, when the Lamborghinis came, when the convoy rolled into her narrow road like something out of a dream, when a man in an expensive suit stepped forward and called her Mama, she would remember this exact moment. The rain had just stopped when Ngozi wiped her hands on her faded wrapper and counted the last coins in her plastic bowl. Her front porch smelled like wet concrete and pepper soup, because even on days she had almost nothing, she still cooked something warm. Hello, my friends and loved ones. Thanks for joining me on this beautiful story. As we continue this story, kindly take a moment to subscribe to this channel, like the video, and I love to always hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it at your end right now? Thank you for subscribing. The morning after Jiho left, Ngozi found the ring. It sat inside her cooking pot like a secret someone had whispered and then run away from. Small, plain, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with weight. She picked it up slowly, turning it over in her palm, feeling the coolness of the metal against her skin. For a long moment, she just stared at it. She didn't know what it meant, didn't know if it was payment or apology or something else entirely, but she knew one thing, it mattered. The way Jiho had moved, the way he looked over his shoulder, the way that black SUV had circled her street like a shark. This ring was part of something bigger than hunger. Ngozi wrapped it carefully in a piece of cloth and tucked it inside an old biscuit tin underneath her only good wrapper. Then she pushed the tin to the back of her cupboard where nobody looked unless they were searching for trouble. "Mama Ngozi!" Amina's voice came sharp and worried through the morning air. She appeared at the gate, headscarf tied tight, face set in that expression mothers wore when they were about to scold you for your own good. "That man," Amina said, not bothering with greetings. "The one you fed yesterday. People are asking about him." Ngozi's stomach tightened. "What people?" "Men in a car, clean shirts, serious faces." Amina stepped closer, lowering her voice. They showed a picture to Chukwu at the corner. Asked if anyone strange had been around. Ngozi wiped her hands on her wrapper, even though they were already dry. "And what did Chukwu say?" He said no. Amina paused, eyes sharp. "But Mama, you can't protect everyone. That man brought trouble to your door. What if they come back?" "Then they come back." "And if they ask you?" Ngozi met her friend's gaze without blinking. "I fed a hungry person. That's all I know." Amina made a sound between a sigh and a prayer. "You are too stubborn for your own good." "And you are too careful for yours," Ngozi replied, but her voice was soft. She understood fear, had lived with it long enough to know its shape. She'd been alone for so long now, her husband gone 15 years, taken by a sickness that came quick and left slow. Her daughter Chidinma, grown and married, living 3 states away with promises to visit that life kept postponing. The house that had once held laughter now held mostly echoes. Feeding people wasn't charity for Ngozi, it was language. The only one she had left that said you matter, and I see you, and you're not alone. Hungry was hungry, and fear was fear. She'd learned long ago that both could kill you if you let them. That afternoon, Pastor Adewale stopped by. He was a small man with a big voice, the kind who prayed like he was wrestling angels and expected to win. "Sister Ngozi," he said, settling onto her bench, "I hear you made a friend yesterday." Ngozi poured him water. "I fed someone, like always." Adewale nodded slowly, studying her face. Kindness is a language God understands. But wisdom is knowing when kindness invites danger into your house. Danger was already here, Ngozi said quietly. "I just gave it something to eat." The pastor was silent for a moment. Then he reached for her hand and prayed, not the loud kind of prayer, but the quiet kind that sounds like someone having a serious conversation with heaven. When he finished, he looked at her with eyes that had seen too many good people hurt by being good. "If they come asking," he said, "don't lie, but don't volunteer either." Ngozi nodded. She understood the difference. 3 days passed, then 4. The neighborhood settled back into its rhythm. Children playing, sellers shouting, life moving forward, because it had no choice. But Ngozi noticed things. A car that drove past twice in 1 hour. A man standing across the street, watching but not buying. Questions being asked in low voices at the corner store. Someone was searching, and on the 5th morning, when Ngozi stepped outside to sweep, she saw it. A paper, folded and wedged into her gate. Official looking. Government stamp in the corner. Words that didn't make sense but sounded important. Property assessment, compliance review, documentation required. Her hands trembled as she read it. She'd lived in this house for 30 years, had paid what little taxes came, had never missed a payment to anyone who asked. So why now? Amina appeared at her shoulder, reading over her arm. "Hey, Mama, what is this?" Ngozi folded the paper slowly, a cold understanding settling in her chest like stones. Kindness had a cost, and someone, somewhere, was preparing to collect. The man who came to collect wore a smile too bright for a poor street. Bankole arrived 3 days after the paper appeared, dressed in a clean shirt with sharp collar edges and carrying a brown folder like it was a weapon. He walked with the posture of someone who expected doors to open before he knocked, and his shoes, polished, unscuffed, made small clicking sounds on Ngozi's concrete path. "Mama Ngozi," he called out, voice smooth as oil on water. "Good afternoon. May I have a moment?" Ngozi was stirring her pot, but she didn't stop. Didn't turn around fully, just looked at him from the corner of her eye, the way you look at something that might bite. "I am busy," she said. Bankole's smile didn't fade. "I understand. I won't take long." He stepped closer, uninvited, and opened the folder with the careful ceremony of someone revealing something important. "I represent the new owners of this area. We're reviewing property records, ensuring everything is in order." Ngozi stopped stirring. "New owners? Development concerns, investors, progress?" Bankole waved his hand vaguely, like these words explained everything. "Your house, specifically, has some issues." "Issues? Your papers are incomplete." He tapped the folder with his pen, still smiling. "The original land documentation doesn't match current registry requirements. Government will be clearing places like this soon. Regularization process." The words sounded official. They sounded real, but they tasted wrong in Ngozi's mouth. "I have lived here since I was young," she said slowly. Bankole nodded with practiced sympathy. "I understand, Mama. That's exactly why I'm here. To help." He pulled out a form, crisp and formal looking. "There's a processing fee. Small amount to protect your rights, ensure your name stays registered, for your own good." Ngozi looked at the paper, at the numbers written there that might as well have been in a foreign language, at Bankole's too bright smile. "How much?" 50,000 to start, then monthly contributions for legal protection. 50,000 naira. The amount made Ngozi's chest tight. She barely had soap money, barely had enough to keep cooking. I don't have this, she said. Bankol's smile flickered, but held. Then we should make arrangements, payment plans. Perhaps you could sign here and we work something out. No. The word came out harder than Ngozi intended. Bankol's pen stopped midair. Mama, you don't understand the situation. I understand you want me to sign something I cannot read properly and pay money I don't have. Ngozi straightened her back even though it hurt. I don't sign. For the first time, Bankol's smile cracked. Just slightly, like a mask slipping. You should think carefully, he said, voice cooler now. These things don't go away by ignoring them. He left the paper on her gate and walked away, shoes clicking like a countdown. After that, Bankol returned. Again and again. Each visit felt heavier than the last, each smile sharper, each warning wrapped in concern that sounded more like threat. Mama, the deadline is approaching. Mama, I saw another house cleared last week. Mama, stubbornness won't save you. The neighbors began to talk. Amina whispered worries. Others avoided eye contact, as if trouble might be contagious. One woman, Chinwe, stopped buying Ngozi's food altogether, saying her husband didn't want complications. Letters began appearing, official-looking notices with government stamps and words like eviction, demolition, outstanding debt. They came in brown envelopes, slipped under her door like threats in the night. Ngozi's hands shook when she read them. She didn't understand half the language, but she understood the message: leave or be removed. She found Adaze at the small office near the market, a young lawyer who helped people when she could, even when they couldn't pay properly. Adaze read the papers with eyes that grew sharper with each line. She was quiet for a long time, too long. These look suspicious, Adaze finally said. The stamps are right, but the language... Some of this doesn't match proper procedure. Can you prove it? Ngozi asked, hope rising in her chest like heat. Adaze's face fell. Proving forgery takes time, documentation, maybe court fees, and Mama... She paused, choosing words carefully. That takes money you don't have. The hope died as quickly as it came. Ngozi walked home slowly, looking at her house, the peeling paint, the rusted gate, the porch where she'd fed so many people over so many years. She considered selling her wedding ring, the one piece of gold she'd kept, considered begging Chidinma for help, even though her daughter was struggling too. But something in her refused to bend. This house was her life, her history, her language. Bankol appeared again 2 days later. This time, he didn't smile at all. Mama Ngozi, he said, voice flat and final. I tried to help you. I offered you options, but you are too proud. Ngozi stood at her doorway, arms crossed. This is your last chance, Bankol continued. Sign the agreement, pay the fee, or what? Bankol looked at her house the way you look at something already broken. Then life will move you. He walked away without another word, and Ngozi felt the walls tightening around her like hands around a throat. The collapse happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Chidinma had come to visit, a rare thing these days with her husband's job keeping them busy and distance making promises hard to keep. She'd been carrying water from the tap, the yellow jerry can balanced on her hip the way she'd done since childhood. Then her breathing changed. It started as a wheeze, thin and tight, like air was trying to pass through a closing door. Chidinma set the water down slowly, one hand going to her chest. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Chidinma? Ngozi dropped her spoon. The sound of it hitting concrete was sharp and final. Her daughter's knees buckled. She went down like something inside had simply stopped holding her up. Chidinma! Ngozi rushed forward, catching her before her head hit the ground. Her daughter's face had gone gray, lips slightly blue, breath coming in horrible, shallow gasps. Amina appeared from nowhere, phone already in hand. I'm calling someone. Hospital, Ngozi said, voice cracking. Now. Adaze arrived with her brother's car within minutes, engine still running, door already open. They lifted Chidinma between them, her body limp and too light, like fear had hollowed her out from the inside. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and waiting. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, too bright and too steady, while Ngozi sat on a plastic chair that squeaked every time she shifted. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. A nurse appeared with a clipboard and a face that had delivered bad news before. She needs oxygen, medication, tests. The nurse paused. There's a deposit required before we can proceed. The number she said made Ngozi's vision blur. Adaeze touched her arm. Mama, we need to find the money. Ngozi nodded, numb. She stood up on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else and walked home in a daze, Amina trailing behind like a worried shadow. Inside her cupboard, wrapped in faded cloth, was the last thing of value she owned, a small gold earring passed down from her own mother. The match to it had been sold years ago during another crisis. This one she'd kept, telling herself it was insurance, emergency money, the last thread connecting her to something that used to be. She unwrapped it slowly, feeling its weight in her palm one final time. Then she walked to the goldsmith near the market and sold it for less than it was worth. The money covered the first bill. Barely. When Ngozi returned to the hospital, Bankole was standing in the corridor. He appeared like smoke, unexpected and suffocating. His clean shirt looked obscene in that place of sickness and fear. I heard about your daughter, he said, voice soft with manufactured concern. I'm sorry, Mama. Ngozi said nothing, just stared at him with eyes that had stopped believing in coincidence. Bankole stepped closer. This doesn't have to be so hard. Sign the agreement. I can arrange a loan, cover the medical bills, help you through this difficult time. For one terrible moment, Ngozi considered it. Considered bending. Considered surrender. The image of Chidinma's gray face, those gasping breaths, it made everything else feel small. But then she thought of the house, the porch where she'd fed hungry people, the walls that held 30 years of memories, the only language she had left that said she existed, that she mattered. This house is my life, she whispered. Bankole's mask slipped. His voice went cold. Then watch life take everything else. He left without another word. Pastor Adewale organized a small collection after Sunday service. People gave what they could. Crumpled bills, coins counted carefully, contributions that came with prayers and worried faces. It helped. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Chidinma stabilized slowly, but the bills kept coming. And at home, other things began to break. The roof started leaking during the next rain, water dripping through in 3 places, forming puddles that spread across the floor like accusation. Ngozi set out pots and buckets to catch the drops, the steady plink, 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 sounding like a clock counting down. Her soup pot got dented when it fell from the shelf, the metal buckling inward like something had punched it from the inside. Small indignities, daily tests, life pulling at the seams. Ngozi patched the roof with old tarps, kept cooking in the dented pot, kept standing, even though her knees screamed at her to sit down and stay down. Then the envelope came. It arrived on a Thursday morning, slipped under her gate like all the others. But this one felt different, heavier, more final. The paper inside had bold red text across the top. Final notice. Ngozi's hands trembled as she read words that blurred together. Eviction proceedings, failure to comply, demolition scheduled, vacate premises within 30 days. 30 days. The walls weren't just tightening anymore, they were closing. Years pass differently when you're waiting for something you don't even know is coming. The biscuit tin stayed hidden in Ngozi's cupboard, pushed to the back behind folded wrappers and old prayer books. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, the ring waited. Small, plain, heavy with meaning she still didn't understand. Some nights, when sleep wouldn't come and her knees ached too badly to ignore, Ngozi would take it out, hold it in her palm. Turn it over slowly, feeling the coolness of the metal, wondering about the man who'd left it, wondering if he'd survived whatever he was running from. She would touch it when she prayed, like a question she was asking God without words. Did it matter? Did any of it matter? The porch bench aged the way she did, wood wearing smooth in some places, splintering in others. She repaired it twice with scraps and nails borrowed from neighbors. The roof patches multiplied over the years, a patchwork of tarps and sheets of zinc that told the story of every rainstorm she'd survived. Ngozi's body betrayed her, slowly, politely, the way bodies do when they've been asked to carry too much for too long. Her knees complained every morning. Her hands developed tremors that made stirring soup an act of concentration. Gray hair pushed through the black until she stopped bothering to hide it. But her spirit stayed the same. She still cooked, still fed anyone who looked hungry, still refused to bend. Chidinma's health never fully recovered. Some months were better than others, but the underlying weakness remained, a shadow that followed her everywhere, making stairs difficult and stress dangerous. The medical bills came and went like tides, each one pulling a little more away. Ngozi sold the radio, then the good pot, then the wedding photo frame, though she kept the photograph itself tucked inside her Bible where memories belonged. Adiaz kept fighting in her own way. She spent evenings at her small desk, tracing signatures on the suspicious documents, comparing stamps, following paper trails that twisted and disappeared into bureaucratic darkness. She found inconsistencies, dates that didn't match, seals that looked almost right, but not quite, names of officials who didn't exist in the right departments. But proving it? That required resources she didn't have, courts that moved slowly, officials who asked questions she couldn't answer. It's like fighting smoke, Adiaz told Ngozi one evening, frustration making her voice tight. I know something's wrong. I just can't catch it. Meanwhile, Bankole's shadow grew longer. He expanded his operations street by street, bringing his folder and his smile and his official-looking papers to other families. The pattern was always the same: friendly warnings, processing fees, mounting pressure, eventual surrender. Some people signed, some people left, some people just disappeared into the cracks of the city, forgotten before they were even gone. Fear became the neighborhood's new language. People stopped talking about it openly, but everyone knew. Everyone felt it. The way you feel weather changing before the rain actually falls. Bankole grew bolder, better dressed, more confident. His car got newer. His smile got sharper. He walked through the area like a landlord inspecting property he already owned. And Ngozi? She kept her head up even when her back wanted to bow, kept cooking even when her hands shook, kept living in the house that was slowly being taken from her by 1,000 small cuts. 20 years passed like that. 20 years of notices and threats and prayers and patches. 20 years of Chidinma's hospital visits and Adiaz's dead-end investigations and Amina's worried warnings. 20 years of touching a ring in the darkness and wondering if kindness had ever mattered at all. The neighborhood changed. Buildings went up. Old faces disappeared. New shops opened with flashy signs and prices nobody could afford. Progress, they called it. Development. Ngozi's street stayed the same. Too poor to matter, too forgotten to save. Until the afternoon, everything changed. It was a Tuesday, quiet and ordinary. The kind of day where nothing important was supposed to happen. Ngozi was on her porch, stirring soup with her dented pot when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not the usual Okada engines or market noise or children playing. This was different, deeper, smoother, like something expensive purring in the distance. She paused, spoon in midair, and listened. The sound grew louder, not one engine, multiple, moving together in a way that felt deliberate, coordinated, purposeful. Amina stepped out of her house, frowning. What is that? The engines got closer, louder. The whole street seemed to pause, conversations stopping mid-sentence, sellers looking up from their wares, children freezing in their games. Ngozi's heart kicked hard in her chest. Because this sound, this wrong, impossible, too expensive for this street sound, was coming directly toward them. She wiped her hands on her wrapper, suddenly aware of the peeling paint behind her, the sagging roof, the patched-together dignity of a house that had survived everything except time itself. The engines turned the corner, and Ngozi saw them, a convoy of Lamborghinis, gleaming and impossible, rolling down her narrow road like destiny on tires. The neighborhood went silent, and the world Ngozi had known for 20 years cracked open like an egg. The cars were so glossy they looked like they'd been painted with light itself. 3 Lamborghinis, black, silver, white, rolled into Ngozi's narrow road with the slow certainty of something that had traveled a long distance to arrive at exactly this spot. The engines purred low and expensive, a sound so foreign to this street that it might as well have been thunder from another planet. People emerged from their houses like the road had turned into a movie scene. Sellers abandoned their stalls. Children stopped mid-game. Phones rose into the air, recording, capturing, trying to make sense of the impossible. Amina grabbed Ngozi's arm. "Mama, what is this?" Ngozi couldn't answer. Her throat had closed around words that wouldn't form. The cars stopped in a perfect line, engines cutting off in synchronized silence. For a moment, nobody moved. The whole street held its breath. Then the doors opened. 3 men stepped out, dressed in black suits that fit like they'd been measured twice and sewn once. They had the posture of professionals, calm, unreadable, backs straight, eyes scanning the crowd with the practiced neutrality of people who'd stood in more dangerous places than this. The tallest one, broad-shouldered with sharp cheekbones, positioned himself near the lead car. The second, leaner and quicker moving, checked something on his phone. The third, the driver, stood with his hands clasped in front of him, expression blank as stone. Later, Ngozi would learn their names: Minsok, Gunwoo, Hyunwoo. But right then, she could only stare, because someone else was stepping out of the center car. A man moved with deliberate slowness, each step measured and purposeful. He wore a tailored suit in charcoal gray, fitted perfectly to shoulders that had filled out with time and weight. His face was composed, jaw set like carved stone, expression controlled in the way of men who'd learned that showing nothing was its own kind of power. A faint tattoo curved along his neck, disappearing into his collar, ink that told stories Ngozi couldn't read. He walked toward her porch like every step had been planned 20 years ago. Ngozi's hands flew to her cheeks. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first, because even though 2 decades had carved him into something sharp and dangerous-looking, even though time had replaced the thin, frightened stranger with this polished, powerful figure, she recognized those eyes. Jiho? The name came out as a whisper, broken and disbelieving. The man stopped directly in front of her porch. The crowd pressed closer, phones recording, neighbors pushing forward to see, to hear, to witness whatever was about to happen. Jiho's expression softened just slightly, like stone warming in sunlight. "Yes, Mama," he said, his voice deeper now, smoother, controlled. "It's me." Ngozi's knees nearly gave out. Amina rushed to steady her, eyes wide with shock, hands gripping Ngozi's arm like an anchor. Jiho glanced past Ngozi at the house behind her. The peeling paint that had gotten worse, the sagging roof with its patchwork of tarps, the tired gate that still squeaked the same way it used to. His jaw tightened. Something flickered behind his eyes, something cold and sharp and focused. Anger, Ngozi realized, not at her, at what had been done to her. "I looked for you," Jiho said quietly, but his voice carried in the silence. "For years. I had nothing when you fed me." He paused and the street seemed to lean in. "But you gave me something bigger than food." Ngozi's throat burned. Tears gathered but didn't fall yet. "I didn't even know who you were." Jiho nodded slowly. "That's why it mattered." He reached into his jacket pocket with careful deliberation. The crowd tensed, uncertain, but he only pulled out a small cloth-wrapped item. He opened it slowly, revealing something that made Ngozi's breath catch. A ring. Plain, heavy-looking. Identical to the one she'd kept hidden for 20 years. "How?" Ngozi stammered. Jiho held it up so she could see clearly. "Because that ring I left you was never payment, Mama. It was a promise." His voice dropped, intimate despite the crowd. "I left it with you, so I would always have a reason to come back." He stepped closer, close enough that only she could hear the next words. "I didn't become who I am because of violence," he said softly. "I became who I am because one poor old black woman showed me mercy when I didn't deserve it. She reminded me I could still be human." Ngozi pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart hammer against her palm. The tears finally broke free, running down her cheeks in hot streams. Jiho's expression hardened again as he looked past her at the damaged house, at the evidence of 20 years of struggle written in peeling paint and patched roofs. "I came back for 2 reasons," he said, voice rising now so the whole street could hear. "Gratitude." He paused and his eyes swept across the crowd, landing on faces in the distance, searching for someone. And justice. The word hung in the air like a bell that had been struck. Jiho turned slowly, surveying the gathered neighbors, the phones recording, the faces watching with confusion and awe and fear mixed together. Then he spoke again, voice calm but absolute. "Bring the proof." Min Seok stepped forward, briefcase in hand, face expressionless. And the street understood. This wasn't a visit. This was a reckoning. Min Seok opened the briefcase with the careful precision of someone performing surgery. Inside were documents, stacks of them, organized with tabs and labels, clean and thick. He laid them on the hood of the silver Lamborghini, creating an impromptu table that turned the street into a courthouse. "Property records," Min Seok said in accented English, his voice clinical and exact. "Original land registration, title deed history, bank transaction trails." He pointed to each section as he spoke. Timeline of fraudulent notices, signature analysis, forged government stamps. The crowd pressed closer, craning necks to see papers they couldn't fully understand, but recognized as important. Official. Real. A motorcycle roared up the street, brakes screeching. Adaz jumped off before it fully stopped, breathing hard, eyes wild. Someone had called her, shouted into the phone that something impossible was happening at Mama Ngozi's house. She pushed through the crowd and froze when she saw the Lamborghinis. Then she saw the documents. "What?" Her voice trailed off as she stepped forward, drawn to the papers like gravity. She picked up one page, then another, eyes scanning rapidly. Her hands started trembling. "This is... How did you..." "We traced every signature," Jiho said calmly. "Every stamp, every fake official, every naira collected under false pretense." Adaz looked up at him, then at Ngozi, then back at the evidence spread before her like an accusation made physical. "I've been trying to find this for years. How do you have all of this?" Jiho's expression didn't change. "Because I had resources you didn't, and a debt to repay." Ngozi stood frozen on her porch, hands still pressed to her face, mind spinning. Gratitude warred with fear in her chest. She'd fed a hungry man, a homeless stranger, and now he stood in front of her with a convoy and bodyguards and evidence that looked like it could destroy lives. What did I get involved in? She thought. Who is he really? But then Jiho looked at her, and his eyes were the same eyes that had flinched at car sounds, the same eyes that had eaten like survival was a choice he had to remake with every bite. The same eyes that had said thank you without needing words. A voice cut through the tension like a knife through cloth. "What is this nonsense?" Bankole pushed through the crowd, face stiff, attempting a laugh that came out strangled. He wore another clean shirt, another fake smile, but both looked thinner now, more desperate. "Who are you people?" He gestured at the cars, at the men in suits, trying to reclaim control of the narrative. "This is private property. You can't just..." "Your name is Bankole," Jiho said. Not a question, a fact. Bankole puffed his chest, but something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty. "So what? I work for legitimate development concerns. These documents," he waved dismissively at Min Seok's evidence, "mean nothing. You can't threaten me." Jiho didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't raise his voice. He only nodded once. Hyunwoo pulled out a phone and pressed play. Bankole's own voice emerged from the speaker. Smooth, persuasive, dripping with false concern. "Processing fees, that's all. These old women, they don't understand how the system works. Keep the pressure steady. They always break eventually." The crowd reacted like a wave. Gasps, angry murmurs, people looking at each other with dawning recognition. Hyunwoo pressed play again. Another recording. "The notices? I have a guy who handles the stamps. Looks official enough. Keep Adaz busy with paperwork while we close the deals. She's too honest to see what's happening until it's too late." Adazi's face hardened into something cold and sharp. "That's enough," she said quietly. But Hyunwoo wasn't finished. One more clip. "Old women are easy. They're too proud to ask for help and too scared to fight back. Perfect targets." The street erupted. Voices rose in anger, shouting over each other. Neighbors who'd been silent for years suddenly found their words. People Bankole had pressured. Families who'd signed papers they didn't understand. Friends who'd watched Ngozi struggle and felt helpless to stop it. He took money from my mother. Those notices, I got them too. He said it was legal. Bankole's face went pale. His smile cracked like cheap plaster. Wait, this is a misunderstanding. Those recordings are out of context. Jiho finally stepped forward, not to threaten, just to deliver the final sentence like a door closing. 20 years ago, he said softly, but every word carried. I was hungry and hunted. Mama Ngozi fed me anyway. Today, you will learn what it feels like when the hunted returns with proof. Bankole tried to back away. The crowd didn't touch him. They didn't need to. They just blocked his path with their bodies, their presence, their collective understanding that the game was over. He turned, looking for an exit, any exit. Then sirens cut through the air. Police cars appeared at the end of the street, blue lights flashing, moving steadily closer. Someone had called them, or they'd been called earlier, tipped off quietly with evidence delivered through channels Bankole didn't know existed. Officer Abdullahi stepped out, already holding handcuffs, face set in that expression cops wear when they know exactly what they're walking into. Bankole's smile didn't just crack, it shattered completely. Officer Abdullahi walked with the steady gait of a man who'd already made his decision before arriving. He was tall, graying at the temples, with the kind of face that had seen enough lies to recognize truth when it was presented cleanly. Behind him, 2 more officers emerged from the second vehicle, hands resting casually near their belts. Not aggressive, but ready. Abdullahi's eyes swept the scene. The Lamborghinis, the suited men, the crowd, the documents spread across the car hood like evidence at trial. Then his gaze landed on Bankole, and something tightened in his expression. Mr. Bankole, Abdullahi said, voice formal and final, we need to talk. Bankole's face flickered between panic and calculation. He straightened his shirt, attempted a smile that came out more like a grimace. Officer Abdullahi, thank goodness you're here. These people, they're harassing me, making false accusations. We received documentation 2 days ago, Abdullahi interrupted calmly. Forged government stamps, fraudulent property notices, audio recordings of extortion. He pulled out his own folder, thinner than Minsok's, but just as damning. We've been building a case. Bankole's eyes darted to a daze. This is her doing. She's been trying to sabotage legitimate business. Legitimate? A Daisy's voice cut through like a blade. She stepped forward, no longer the young lawyer who'd been chasing dead ends for years. Now she had proof. Now she had backing. You forged signatures on official documents. You impersonated government officials. You collected money under false pretense from at least 17 families on this street alone. She pulled out her own notes, hands steady despite the fury in her voice. Section 467 of the Criminal Code, forgery of documents. Section 419, obtaining by false pretense. Section 397, extortion. She looked directly at Bankole. I can recite the rest if you'd like. Bankole's face went red. He turned to Ngozi, voice rising, desperate. Mama, tell them. I was trying to help you. I offered you options. You were too stubborn. You preyed on me, Ngozi said quietly. The words were soft, but they landed like stones. Bankole's mouth worked, but no sound came. He looked around wildly, at the crowd that had once feared him, at the officers closing in, at the evidence he couldn't deny. Jiho spoke then, voice low and controlled, not a threat, but an ending. 20 years ago, I ran because powerful men decided I was disposable, he said. Today, you learn what happens when the disposable survive and return with proof. Abdullahi moved forward, handcuffs already out. Mr. Bankole, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and forgery of official documents. No, wait. Bankole backed up, hands raised. You don't understand. There are people involved, bigger than me. I was just following. Then you'll tell us their names at the station, Abdullahi said, unmoved. He grabbed Bankole's arm, not roughly, but firmly, the practiced motion of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The handcuffs clicked into place with a sound that felt louder than it was, final and irreversible. The crowd reacted in waves. Some gasped, Others shouted approval. A woman in the back began crying, not sad tears, but the kind that come when pressure finally releases. An old man clapped slowly, then faster, and others joined until scattered applause mixed with voices raised in relief and vindication. He took everything from my sister. My mother signed those papers. We thought we had no choice. Bancol was led toward the police car, stumbling slightly, shirt untucked now, smile completely gone. He looked smaller somehow, like the costume of authority had been stripped away to reveal something hollow underneath. As the car door opened, he looked back at Ngozi one last time, not with anger, but with something worse. Disbelief, as if he couldn't understand how an old woman who could barely afford soap had brought him down. Ngozi met his gaze and said nothing. She didn't need to. The door closed. The engine started. The police cars pulled away slowly, blue lights still flashing, taking Bancol toward consequences that had been 20 years in the making. When the sirens faded, the street exhaled. Ngozi's knees wobbled. The strength that had held her upright through threat after threat, notice after notice, year after year, it all drained out at once. She swayed, hand reaching for the porch railing, and Amina caught her. "Mama, sit down." "My house," Ngozi whispered. "Is it?" Jiho stepped forward, and Min Seok handed him a specific document. Jiho held it out to Ngozi with both hands, like presenting something sacred. "Your house is yours," he said. "The fake notices are void. The money Bancol collected has been traced. A daezi will help you file for compensation." He paused. "You won't be moved, not by him, not by anyone." Ngozi took the paper with shaking hands. She couldn't read all of it through the tears blurring her vision, but she understood the meaning, the weight, the safety. Her shoulders dropped, really dropped, for the first time in what felt like decades. Like she'd been carrying something invisible and crushing, and someone had finally lifted it away. The crowd began to disperse slowly, voices still buzzing with disbelief and relief, phones still recording, the story already spreading beyond the street into the wider world. But Jiho remained. He waited until the noise settled, until it was just Ngozi, Amina, Adaeze, and his men standing in the fading afternoon light. Then he spoke again, voice softer now, more personal. "There is still one thing I must return," he said. Ngozi looked up, confused. "Return?" Jiho nodded slowly. "Something beyond papers. Something I should have given back 20 years ago, but couldn't until I became someone worthy of keeping the promise." He reached into his jacket, and the street held its breath one more time. The crowd dispersed slowly, like water draining from a basin, people drifting back to their houses, voices still humming with disbelief, phones clutched in hands that had recorded everything. Ngozi sat on her porch bench, the same one she'd sat on for 30 years, and suddenly it felt smaller. Like all that power, the cars, the suits, the justice, had filled the street so completely that now, in its absence, everything seemed quieter than before. Jiho remained standing, patient, hands clasped in front of him. His men had stepped back, giving space, though their presence still marked the street like punctuation. "Mama," Jiho said softly. "May I sit?" Ngozi nodded, unable to speak yet. He sat beside her on the bench, careful not to crowd her, and for a moment they were just two people on a porch, not a Mafia boss and the woman he'd returned for, just a man and the person who'd fed him when the world was trying to kill him. "After I left your porch," Jiho began, voice low, "I ran for 3 more days. The people hunting me, they were dangerous, connected. I couldn't come back without putting you in danger." Ngozi's throat tightened. "What did you do?" "I survived." Jiho looked at his hands. "I found people who needed someone like me, someone with nothing to lose. I worked, I learned, I became useful." He paused. "And then I became powerful. But power without purpose is just noise." He turned to look at her. "Your kindness became my compass, Mama. When I had to make choices, cruel ones, hard ones, I would think, what would that woman on the porch do? Not because you were perfect, but because you were human when you didn't have to be." Ngozi's vision blurred. "I just gave you food. You gave me more than that." Jiho reached into his jacket and pulled out the ring again, the plain, heavy one that matched the ring she'd hidden. "This ring belonged to my grandfather. It was the only thing I had left of family, of home, of who I was before everything went wrong. He held it up between them. I left it with you, not as payment, but as a promise. That one day I would return, that I would find you, that I would make sure the woman who saved my life would never have to fight alone again. Ngozi's hands trembled as she stood, slowly, knees protesting. She walked inside her house, and everyone waited. Jiho, Amina, Adaize, even the bodyguards standing like statues near the cars. When she returned, she carried the old biscuit tin. Her hands shook as she opened it, pulling back layers of cloth to reveal the matching ring, tarnished slightly from time, but still whole, still heavy with meaning. I kept it, she whispered. I didn't know why, but I kept it. Jiho took the ring with both hands, like receiving something sacred. For the first time since he'd arrived, his composure cracked. His jaw tightened, his eyes shone. 20 years, he said. You kept it for 20 years. I thought maybe you'd come back for it, Ngozi admitted. Or maybe I just needed to believe someone remembered. Jiho closed his hand around both rings. I never forgot. Adaize cleared her throat gently. Mama, your daughter, Chidinma, the hospital bills. Jiho's attention sharpened. What hospital bills? Ngozi waved her hand dismissively. It's handled. Mama. Jiho's voice was firm but gentle. Tell me. So she did. About Chidinma's collapse, the medications, the ongoing weakness, the bills that came like tides, each one pulling more away. When she finished, Jiho was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded to Min-seok, who pulled out his phone and made a call in rapid Korean. The bills are handled, Jiho said simply, and there will be a fund for medical care, for whatever she needs. Not charity, respect. Ngozi's breath caught. I can't. You already did, Mama. You already paid. This is just the world catching up. Amina stepped forward then, wringing her hands. Mama Ngozi, I said you were inviting problems. I was wrong. Ngozi reached for her friend's hand. You were scared. Fear makes sense. But you weren't scared. I was terrified, Ngozi corrected gently. I just didn't let it choose for me. Pastor Adewale arrived then, breathless from hurrying, eyes wide at the scene before him. When he understood what had happened, he didn't preach. He just asked if he could pray. They stood together, Ngozi, Jiho, Amina, Adaize, Adewale, while the pastor spoke words that weren't fancy or dramatic, just honest. Thanks for mercy that traveled 20 years to return. Thanks for justice that moved quietly until it was time to roar. Thanks for kindness that refused to die even when the world tried to kill it. When he finished, the street was golden with late afternoon light. The Lamborghinis still sat outside, glossy and impossible. Phones still recording from windows, the story already spreading across the city and beyond. But the real story wasn't the cars. It was Ngozi's porch, the dented pot, the patched roof. The bench where a stranger had once eaten like survival was a choice. It was mercy coming back, 20 years later, knocking gently on a broken porch, calling her Mama, and refusing to let her be erased. Jiho stood to leave, but paused at the gate. I'll check on you, Mama, he said. Not because you need me to, because I need to remember who I'm supposed to be. Ngozi nodded, unable to speak through the tears. The engine started. The convoy rolled away slowly, respectfully, like royalty leaving a queen. And when the sound faded, the loudest thing on that street was the sound of a promise finally coming home.